Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kelly Buckley, and it's July 31st, 2020. Welcome to this edition of Facebook Live. And we're going to talk about several things, mostly some of the economic announcements and events that have occurred just recently in the last week or so. Also, an update on COVID-19 vaccines, because that's very, very critical to the reopening of our economy and a return to normalcy in the lives of our country and community. We're also going to talk about some of our holdings, top holdings, that we've gotten a lot of questions about over the last few weeks. That would be Qualcomm, CoreCivic, and Boeing. Then I want to talk a little bit about dealing with uncertainty. I feel fortunate in that all my adult life, whether as an Air Force pilot or in this occupation, I found commonalities, things that carried over. One of them is being able to make decisions based on very limited information. But limited information can cause a lot of what's called cognitive dissonance. And that cognitive dissonance can lead to anxiety. So I want to talk about dealing with uncertainty and anxiety and how we can better cope with it maybe. We also want to reiterate some things that we've said in previous editions of Facebook Live, where we've tried to give you our firm's glide path or guidance on where our portfolios, Spectrum's portfolios, are likely to go, both by the end of this year and in the next 4 to 5 years. You get beyond that, and it's really difficult because policies will change, events will intervene. But we do have some thoughts that we want to share with you on that as well. So first, let's talk about some of the important market events that have occurred this week. A couple of days ago, we had a GDP announcement, gross domestic product announcement. And this is really important because this is done on a quarterly basis to help us understand what a 3-month period is looking like. If you saw anything in the media about this GDP announcement, and it would have been yesterday likely, then you would have seen that the economy had collapsed and that the total dollar value of all the goods and the services that our country produced had gone down in that quarter 34.1%. But folks, that was not true. The quarter decline was 9.5%. And if you think about it, during a majority of that quarter, our country was effectively shut down in almost all 50 states. And from my perspective, I think 9.5% decline is great. But I also think it's very interesting to note that the press, basically all of it, took that 9.5% quarterly decline and annualized it like it's going to continue to decline at the same relative rate for a year. That's nonsensical. It's completely untrue. And this is a great example of how the secular press manipulates data to fit their agenda and their storyline. So 9.5% decline when you've basically totally shut down your economy. Thank goodness. Thank the good Lord. I think that is a testament to the effect of the stimulus programs that our federal government put into effect, including the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, as well as the stimulus dollars that were sent to those at most income levels to help tide them over during that time. So not a bad GDP announcement in my view. That's a record decline from, we didn't keep records in the Great Depression, but that's a record decline for a quarter. But just remember, the economy is much more open now than it was in that quarter. And as we've stated consistently, we felt the second quarter would by far be the worst quarter. It'd be a period of negative growth. It's our firm's firm expectation that you're going to see positive growth in the third quarter, where we are now, and well above average growth, if not superb growth, by the time we get into the fourth quarter, the last 3 months of this year. Homeownership numbers have come out in the last week, And in the second quarter, home ownership was up to 67.9% of Americans. That is the highest percentage since 2008. And in my opinion, that is a great example of making lemonade out of lemons. Because this economic shutdown due to COVID has created very, very low interest rates. Folks are taking advantage of that. They're buying first homes. They're refinancing mortgages. Please, if you have any doubt about whether it's important for you to refinance your current mortgage, please call our office and we'll be glad to run the numbers for you and provide them to you. But if you think you have an opportunity, it'd be best to seize it now, because in our opinion, these rates will not last much longer. So seize the day. Next, leading index and indicators were up 2% in June. The leading index is a statistical model that tells you what the opinion of our citizens and businesses are of future economic events. That's why they call it the leading index. So it tends to be a very, very accurate indicator. So it was up 2% in June. It had previously been up 13.2% in May. Both of those are excellent or superb numbers. We don't have July's yet. But if people are anticipating better times, they generally do occur. COVID-19 vaccine. You know, this is really instrumental in everything that happens in your portfolios. Your portfolios are allocated in a way that emphasizes coming off an extremely low point in our economy. So the portfolio elements tend to be things that have very low downside, but they have high upside expected movements. So a vaccine, it's instrumental in getting the economy completely reopened and returning life to normal. And I know we've heard in the press that's not going to happen. Well, we've all heard that before, and it did. Life will return to normal because vaccine availability is looking better daily. So we've listed a couple of few companies here that are currently working in phase 3. That's large-scale human testing. One, Johnson & Johnson, announced yesterday that they've begun clinical trials, human trials, both in the U.S. and Belgium. We had a social media post on July 10th also where we talked about vaccine development. This was regarding positive reports from Gilead Sciences' experimental treatment of remdesivir for coronavirus and in the effectiveness that had in treating the symptoms. Gilead also published reports stating the drug reduced the risk of death for infected patients, has to be given early enough, by 62%. On July 22nd, we had another social media post, and we're talking about Pfizer there and BioNTech, where the federal government has already contracted with Pfizer for $1.95 billion of payment to purchase 100 million doses of their COVID-19 vaccine, which is moving very, very quickly through phase 3 testing. An additional 500 million doses can be acquired likely by the end of the year or the first quarter of next year. The U.S. government, President Trump's administration, has already announced that those vaccinations will be given free to all Americans, no qualifying, no cost. We're in phase 3 trials there. I've said consistently that we are likely to get a vaccine by the end of the year. Based on what I'm seeing from some of the news releases that CDC has issued and that Pfizer, Moderna, and other companies have issued about vaccine development, it could easily be well before the end of December. On Tuesday, Moderna Inc. said that their vaccine induced a very robust immune response and protected against infection on a study that was done on primates. they're moved into phase 3 as well. Johnson & Johnson announced on Thursday their first human clinical trials. I could go on. This is just in our country. Europe has drugs in the latter stages of development. So does Russia. So does China. The international community seems to be united on the point that whoever can get vaccines that are effective and safe out first will have the lead on this. And no one's being selfish here. I expect that our international community will come together. So the bottom line is, when those vaccines, those 100 million doses that are already purchased by the United States government from Pfizer are available in the fourth quarter of this year, I would expect those doses to go to our most vulnerable. That would be our older Americans and those who have comorbidities, and of course, our first responders, and especially doctors and nurses who are dealing with these issues up close and personal, sometimes on a daily basis, depending on their specialty. A lot of the progress that's been made with the vaccines is a direct effect of President Trump's leadership in March in establishing his advisory board and Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed is a private-public partnership that allows the federal government to facilitate and accelerate through reducing onerous regulations the development, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, therapies, and diagnostic measures. It was begun in early April 2020, concepted in March. The chief advisor of Operation Warp Speed, Moncef Slaoui, said, quote, "My personal opinion, based on my experience in the biology of the virus," this gentleman is a virologist, "I think this vaccine is going to be highly effectuous. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the 90% plus range." That's an extremely effective vaccine. The FDA only requires 50% plus effectiveness. So this disease is different from many diseases in that we've been able, in a very safe way, through the federal government's applied resources, both financial and in terms of research and development, and bringing private-public partnership together in world record time to develop a vaccine that's going to be extremely effective and will be to market soon. That will stop the economic shutdowns that are crippling our country and our children's educations. Robert Redfield, and both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield right now are testifying in the House. I listened to some of their testimony this morning. Is the current director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And I want to read you all a quote that he gave on July 14th. And it says as follows: "We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID." Remember, folks, we talked about this over a month or two ago. He also went on to say we're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess than we had as background in deaths from COVID. And we talked about drug overdose and suicides. This is a function of depression. It's also a function of anxiety. And this is where our public health officials, who have very difficult jobs, they can get a little target fixated. You know, I know men, the service of our country, who got target fixated and drove their $30 million aircraft into the ground delivering munitions, bombs. Got target fixated. I know people that got target fixated, a real good friend of mine from the academy in the F-15, and pulled into the ocean down over the working area south of Florida, thinking it was the sky, and of course immediately died. Target fixation is a dangerous thing, and you know, I'm seeing that a lot in our political leaders who seem so myopically focused on one number, and that's the number of people who are testing positive. They're not looking at the whole picture, in other words. They're not looking at the effect that drug overdose and suicide caused by isolation and depression, caused by losing your job and your home, are having our population. And their effects are not short term like coronavirus is. Coronavirus is going to be done in the immediate future, in my opinion. I'd say well before the end of the first half of next year. At the outside, it's done. We've beaten it because of our fine research scientists and physicians and government officials who got the right tools to the right place at the right time with a lot of resources behind them. You know, if you ever read anything about the Manhattan Project, which was the project that created the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb in World War II, and you looked at how we went from something to the most powerful weapon in existence even today in a very short period of time, you understand that Operation Warp Speed was based on the Manhattan Project. Same principles applied, same amount of resources devoted. That kind of input from this administration is what generated an excellent result. But we've got to start thinking about collateral damage. We've got to stop being target fixated. This is a message to our politicians and to our public health officials. I'm very concerned about my first grade grandchild. And I'm very concerned about our school superintendent and Board of Education not opening up school when we're supposed to start. We're going to be virtual for at least a while. That negates all scientific information that would tell us that children have extremely little chance of getting COVID-19. The evidence suggests that they have extreme little chance of passing it to anyone. That would include their teachers. And teachers' unions are almost universally adamant about not going back to school. Now, their paychecks are still being made. And so I think that's a problem. I think we need to align our interests here. And I think we need to let science dictate the outcome. There are many private schools that will be open, and that's where our beloved granddaughter will be going. I think a lot of people are going to make that choice because if children are not in school, their parents can't work in many cases. And if children are safe in school, and if teachers who generally are 55 or less, who are safe in school as well, according to all the statistics surrounding COVID virility, if we don't open our schools, then job growth, regrowth ceases, and the economy continues to meander along. Some folks may think that's a good idea for other reasons that don't relate to COVID-19's effects. We think that the science should make the decision on schools reopening, and that businesses are doing a great job at helping remind their patrons of social distancing, masking up, both of which are critically important at this stage. We don't think they should be shut down. We don't think our restaurants should be shut down. We don't think that places that are legitimately doing a great job should be shut down. And we don't think that politicians should be excusing those who are rioting, not just protesting. I 100% support protesting because I support the First Amendment and every amendment in our nation's Constitution, just as I know you do. But for folks who are in the street rioting, burning, looting, or protesting and not social distancing and masking up, they get an excusal. Churches in a lot of places aren't. And that doesn't seem right, and it's clearly constitutional infringement. In our state, our governor is the leader in unemployment among all 50 states. and also the leader in having his decisions overturned by federal and state courts. And I wish that every elected official would make decisions that first follow the oath you swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and remember the Declaration of Independence and all the Federalist Papers are derived from this concept of liberty and independence and self-governance. Our liberty is important. Don't violate it. Don't shut our children's education down. That's a public health concern. Our public health officials, please think about target fixation and think about all the variables you're looking at. The death rate is plummeting nationally from COVID. The number of COVID cases detected will continue to go up, folks. Our country is the leader in testing. We've done over 59 million COVID tests. We are doing more than 500,000 COVID tests per day. So the number of COVID infections will continue to go up. But guess what? All of us have been infected with other illnesses like influenza, common flu. We've all gotten it, and we're all going to get COVID at some point. We need to quarantine the most affected, older and comorbid patients, not our children, not our working adults, not healthy Americans that aren't 70 and up. I had an email that was sent to me that I wanted you guys to read. And I know this chart behind me is small. We're working on that, by the way. So I'm going to read this to you. This is a wonderful woman and someone that I've had the privilege of working with as a client of our firm since 1987. And this is to Dr. Manny Kalk, who's Superintendent of Public Instruction in Fayette County. Dear Dr. Kalk, I'm retired now, but I obtained my teaching degree from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Please do not perceive this as a bully or pushy communication. I taught Chapter 1 math at Maxwell Elementary, that's here in Lexington. What I witnessed at this school and neighborhood was the need to have children led, taught, and supervised. We got a grant to bring children into the school to get them out of the cold and out of mischief. We helped them with homework, not completed at home, and a ready hot breakfast. These children were on free breakfasts and lunches. This school is one of the lower income areas of our city. These children were on free lunches and breakfasts. Nutrition's important. I have 4 grandchildren, ages 14, 12, 5, and 3.5 years old. I care for them before and after school. They do not have skill to use their time productively, even though they are well behaved. The best place for children is in school, to be supervised by trained teachers. I'd like to add something, particularly when all of the science says there would be no ill effect to the children or to the teachers. Teachers who are compromised or older or feel like it's just too much, let them stay home. The young age, she goes on, is an optimal time for learning. And we know that because science tells us this is where their brains are developing at a rapid rate. She went on, please reconsider the virtual opening decision. Children lose some of the learning during the summer. Some children will start out almost 6 months behind. That's because we shut schools down. Thank you for trying to do what is best in your very difficult position. And Superintendent Clark, I feel the same way. Thank you. And thank you to our governors making some incredibly difficult decisions. And you're almost in a no-win situation. All we, the people, would ask is make the decision based on science, not union lobbying, not what's politically correct, not what northeastern states did that flooded the death statistics by putting COVID patients in nursing homes where the very most vulnerable Americans are. Let the science rule these decisions. And if people are making a good faith effort to mask up and maintain social distancing, don't punish the economy and our people and cause them to lose their homes, their jobs, and maybe their lives. Because the collateral damage caused by suicide, anxiety, depression, drug overdose, increased alcoholism, that's all there. The statistics are clear. In many states, we've doubled in those numbers over a normal year. The number of people who die by suicide, who died by drug overdose, will dwarf the number of Americans that we've lost to COVID. Here's a recommendation from Dr. Fauci. I think everybody's familiar with him. Dr. Fauci now says, as of this last week, that it may be necessary to wear eye protection. He said, quote, theoretically, you should protect all the musical services. So if you have goggles or an eye shield, you should use it. Dr. Fauci, I agree with you. If I'm a physician or I'm a nurse or I'm someone that's in someone else's face. But you see, sir, we've been operating every single day here at our firm, Spectrum Financial Alliance, since this thing started. And that's good because that way we are able to provide immediate help to our clients who needed that help. We did so safely, maturely. We're able to make our own decisions. I don't need a face shield. I'm not in someone's face who's sick or talking to them at a close distance. We use social distancing in our firm. The folks who think that this isn't important, that it could not go to this bubble concept, I bet you wouldn't believe we'd be where we are now 6 months ago either. I don't think any of us would. I wouldn't have. But it does need to stop. Let's look at Kentucky deaths as reported by the Centers for Disease Control. This is through yesterday. So in Kentucky, 731 people have passed away, or 0.016%. 0.016%. And because of that, and I'm sure the number's better than it would have been if we hadn't taken some measures like social distancing, like masking up, like maybe a short shutdown to let the science tell us what the best thing to do is, like especially protecting the vulnerable population or those who had diabetes, heart disease, emphysema, asthma, etc. But not now, because the number of deaths that will result from these shutdowns, I'll bet you, will dwarf that number over the next 5 years. So let's go to the next slide. Let's look at death of Kentuckians. Now these dates, again, this is CDC data. We didn't make them up. The dates that we pulled these numbers from are December 6th of 2018 through July 31st of 2020. And they reported the actual deaths you see in the column under deaths, and then we annualized it. So, Kentucky is the number one ranking state for heart disease of all 50 states. And so, of course, coronary heart disease is the number one killer in our state. And on an annualized basis, this year, 8,064 Kentuckians are going to die of heart disease. Lung disease, 5,162. Lung cancer, 4,700. Stroke, we could go on and on. Kidney disease, 1,000. Influenza pneumonia, notice is at the bottom, is our 10th leading cause of death. And y'all are probably aware that also primarily occurs in older Americans or those who have compromised systems. We're going to lose 1,385. 1,385. Now, in all likelihood, the number of COVID deaths in Kentucky is going to be dwarfed by the number of deaths caused by flu, and certainly by any other illness, many of which have been uncontrolled for a long period of time, because the authorities have scared people to even come out of their home and go to the doctor if they had some angina, some heart palpitations and pain. This is not a good thing. Let's compare flu deaths versus COVID-19 deaths. Folks, this is CDC data. We just pulled the data and organized it. As I said earlier, children, the science says, are basically not touched by this thing. And it's very difficult for a child not only to contract COVID, but to pass it to anyone, unlike normal flu. So we divide this up into age groups. I hope this is big enough for y'all to see. COVID deaths under 1 year. This is in the entire country. 14 deaths. 14 deaths. 1 to 4 years, 9 deaths. 5 to 14 years, 19 deaths. Pretty small numbers. Well, let's compare them. Under 1 year, COVID, we said, was 14. Ordinary flu, 14. 1 to 4 years, 9 COVID deaths. Ordinary flu, 41 deaths. 5 to 14 years, 19 deaths for COVID, 50 deaths for common flu. 15 to 24 years, 202 deaths for COVID, influenza 52. So what you'll see here is that influenza, for those who are younger, is much more virulent, much more dangerous than COVID deaths. Next slide. We've had a lot of questions about upcoming presidential election. And the question that tends to be asked is, Kelly, what if Joe Biden is elected? And my answer is the same as it was in 2016. When Secretary Clinton was running, her policies were being presented as vastly different from those of the policies of President Trump. And what I said then was true now. I said both Bill and Hillary, among all politicians, are the most bought and paid for by Wall Street and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And their policies would differ somewhat. They would slow a recovery down. They wouldn't stop it. We know that's true because everybody was scared to death about Bill Clinton coming into office based on what he said he was going to do. And we had some really good economic years and investment market years during his administration. So I suspect that if Joe Biden was elected, that his policies would not deviate as much as he is catering to the far left and the socialist among Democrats. I think he would look to where his money had come, and it's come from the same sources as we typically see, and many of those are involved in the financial services industry or Wall Street. So I want you to know that based on the count we've done at the Electoral College recently, there is little or no chance for a President Biden. And of course, there's a lot of things that are going to prevent that. We're going to go into some of those things now. The Electoral College determines the outcome, not the popular vote, which can be manipulated and has been manipulated in areas where they have voted by mail, not absentee, but mass mailings by mail. That's not wise. We've had a lot of issues with that, and those issues will be heightened in a presidential election. Since the Electoral College determines it, and since the count there is well above, by our count, our opinion, the 302 votes that President Trump received when he was candidate Trump, we do not see any path for a President Biden. There's going to be multiple October surprises. One of the ones that's not listed here is 3 debates, which it appears that Vice President Biden has agreed to. This is not going to be pretty. Vice President Biden has never been a good debater, but he is obviously a compromised individual at this point, And if he had a good showing, it would be very surprising. I think our President Trump, will handily win those debates, and it won't be a close call. John Durham's report. John Durham is a U.S. attorney appointed by Attorney General Barr to go back and look at the abuses that took place leading up to the 2016 election. The Durham report, it's all over the map, but based on what we have studied and read, is very likely to be released prior to September. And when it is released, folks, I think we've seen enough hints to be able to say safely, heads are going to roll, legal indictments, criminal indictments are going to occur. I believe arrests will be made. I think some of those arrests and some of those indictments are going to be individuals who you're very familiar with. I think it's going to go to the top of most of the national law enforcement agencies and the intelligence apparatus of our country who politicized a presidential election, not just before the election, which is a crime, but even after the election had occurred and after the presidency, the new presidency, had been embarked upon. USMCA and China trade agreements kicked in June. We are already seeing some of their effects. We will see tremendous effects going forward from those agreements. And the problems that we have with China now as the purveyor of multiple pandemics, SARS, which wasn't controlled in our country in 2009, was a Chinese virus, and we could go list a lot more. Those viruses have originated in China. This one originated. Dr. Fauci has stated that if we had gotten 1 week notice earlier from China about coronavirus, tens of thousands of Americans would not have died. We've lost over 150,000 Americans to this disease. If you think about what could come out of that's good, if anything could come out of it's good, I think what's going to come out of it is corporate chieftains and boards of directors of American corporations are going to bring their factories back from an unreliable country like China that not only doesn't control epidemics in their own borders, but allows them to go international and become pandemics, and most importantly, tries to cover it up. That effort did not succeed. It won't succeed going forward. But the good thing is it may bring hundreds of factories and companies back to the U.S., where under the current administration, President Trump's administration, we've seen tens of thousands of new American jobs in factories which pay a living wage plus with benefits. They're not the service jobs that we saw under the previous administration. These are jobs you can actually support a family on. So those jobs coming back is going to be a positive outcome from a horrendous situation absolutely fomented by China. Then $10 trillion in stimulus. That's $10 trillion plus. Last time we spoke about the stimulus number in our various writings, we talked about approximately $8 trillion of stimulus between what has been allocated by our Congress and what has been allocated and placed on the economy by our nation's Federal Reserve. Now we have a new stimulus program, which could be out in a matter of days. And it's going to basically allow American families, again, to receive a stimulus check. And supposedly it's going to contain another element of PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. So this level of stimulus is literally a huge tsunami of cash. It boggles my mind to think of the effect, positive effect, that has on our economy. I want to point out in Spectrum's portfolios, since the market low day, which you guys might remember was March 23rd of this year, a day we called in written social media comments to you on April 2nd. Since that day, your accounts net of cost, all Spectrum accounts included, is 38.6% through yesterday's close. We're up 3.0% as a firm in the last 30 days. Annualized, obviously, that'd be over 36% return. We are on the right track. New stimulus will add to that. The stimulus that's out there is a tsunami that can have little result other than buoying the economy, maintaining employment, and helping us get closer to the obvious fix, which is a vaccine. Another question that's been asked is, how do we expect some of our top holdings to perform over this last half of the year? And now we're coming up to the last 5 months of the year, beginning tomorrow. There's no question that the second quarter was terrible, as we predicted, as I think was widely thought. The question, though, is the third quarter a terrible quarter? Do we have negative GDP growth in the third quarter and maybe even in the fourth? Well, if some folks had their way, and if the economy was flat closed again, and if our children received no schooling, and if we allowed rampant drug abuse, spousal abuse, overdoses, alcoholism, no education, no future to occur, I guess we'd have a problem and it could lead to recession. But that's not what we expect to happen, and I don't think it's going to be allowed to happen by our current national presidential administration. I think we are on the road to a rapid recovery. We said it was V-shaped, and it is. You can see that by looking at any trace line from the March 23rd low. It's gone up almost as symmetrically as it went down in about a 6-week period of time. It's an amazing V-shaped recovery. But with the amount of stimulus and the policy tools that are in play and vaccine, we expect our performers, which are weighted towards the thesis that the economy reopens smartly, continues. Now, I know there's times you got to, again, like you talked about last time, you got to pull the economy out of afterburner, maybe retrench a little bit in hot areas, and then plug it back in. So that's a given. And we got to wear a mask, and we got to social distance. But given the economy reopening, no, we do not think that the third quarter will be a recessionary quarter. We think there will be strong positive growth equaling or exceeding 3%. We think that the fourth quarter will be a moonshot, 4, 5, 6%, based on all the synergistic factors we've discussed on several of these Facebook Live presentations and through our social media posts. We think this last half is going to allow our portfolios by December 31st to have not only positive returns, but returns that are likely to be in the 10% plus range, approximately. Going on through the next 3 to 5 years, we fully expect President Trump to be reelected. I think it's clear that the opposition, unless they form in a complete revolution, which I don't think can happen because there's a lot of patriots that won't allow that, I think that they have made their bed and they're going to lie in it in a resounding defeat for socialism, for government tyranny, for fascists called Antifa and maybe other groups that are rioting, burning, and looting. And the ones who have been most affected by that are Democrat-run states, Democrat cities, primarily in blue states, where their local mayors think it's okay to let people riot without the threat of arrest, or when arrested, to be issued a ticket and released. This has resulted in widespread police shootings, not by the policemen. This is police officers being shot, police being knifed, police being clubbed, police being blinded by these people who are acting with impunity. We think they'll be shut down, but those states, they may shut themselves down. They may cater to the mob. But for the rest of America, which is freedom-loving, we think we're already out of recession. We think the bottom was in on March 23rd, as we stated right on April 2nd. We think we're in a very prolonged V-shape where the economy dropped quickly and will continue to rise quickly. There will be speed bumps along the way, but no brick walls, just speed bumps. Let's talk about a holding that I've been asked a lot about. Yesterday, Qualcomm was up a little over 15%. Qualcomm is a major tech element, and it is our firm's #1 holding by design. Yesterday, it went up over 15% because they settled the second and last major legal case they had pending prior to us buying them. We bought them before they settled on the first case, which was with Apple. That settlement was extremely successful for Qualcomm. This one was with Highway, the Chinese company that's been barred from doing business in America by a courageous administration, presidential administration. And they settled for billions of dollars with Qualcomm. That's why Qualcomm went up. They're going to pay Qualcomm a ton of money going forward in licensing fees, just as Apple was forced to do after a judge in the Silicon Valley said they couldn't have their own business model. It's going to be dictated by a court. That decision got thrown out on appeal, as we predicted it would. Qualcomm is the leader in 5G technology. Qualcomm's value now is nowhere near as high as it'll be in the next 3 to 4 years or even a year from now. Qualcomm is the future and is the major proprietary owner of 5G technology. They're in the driver's seat in both cell phone technology and automobiles, self-driving automobiles, and many other sectors of the economy that are going to rely on this type of technology and chips. CoreCivic is another position I've been asked about. CoreCivic, folks, is a private prison company. It has 2 problems right now, and they're short-term, and that's why we continue to hold them. They've been beaten down about 50% in the last year. But I'm holding them because I know these problems are temporary. We're certain of where they're going to go. So their #1 problem is political. CoreCivic's a private prison company. And, a bunch of blue state governors just released a bunch of prisoners. They're putting people that work in jail and won't close down their work. They're arresting them, taking them to jail. But they've put tens of thousands of dangerous felons out on the streets, which is causing a significant uptick in crime in the cities and states that did that. And you know who they are: Illinois, California, people like that. They're seeing the results of what they planted the seeds for. CoreCivic, therefore, has seen business declines. But those business declines are temporary because those criminals will reoffend as they're already doing. And once we get through COVID, there won't be an excuse for politicians to give people a free pass to rape, murder, and pillage, and they'll have to be reincarcerated. That's a given, and in my opinion, that's a fact. Second problem relates to their financial structure. CoreCivic's financial structure is that they're incorporated as a real estate investment trust. Under federal law, they have to pay 90% of their dividends out to each of the investors. That would be you and me if we own shares of them. That's resulted in us realizing during the time market decline dividends that were as high as 13 to 17%. So don't just look at the stock price. On many of our positions, we're actually no loss at all after you consider the dividend. But they have stopped the dividend. They did that in June. And the announcement the company made at that time through their CEO was that they were examining their capital structure. Now, that means they're looking at getting rid of the REIT mantle. It's actually like a stone around their neck. If you're an REIT, you're dictated that you've got to shed a lot of money in dividends. And this is a company that's healthy on their balance sheet and growing, and they need control of those dividends so they don't have to go to the bank and continue to borrow money. I think what comes out of that is sometime in September, according to the company's expectations, we're going to see a new CoreCivic, new incorporated vehicle. I think it'll be as a C Corp, perhaps, that'll allow them to control their cash flow. Here's what I know. I know that the company's real estate holdings today are worth significantly more by itself if the company stopped all operations than the stock is selling for right now on Wall Street. Can't afford to sell something like that. likely to be a double when you get a quarter or two past the election, and likely to resume their dividend, but in a different format, probably as a C corporation. Strong hold, not afraid to buy it. We are buying it with new money. Boeing. Boeing has been a little bit of an albatross around our neck, so to speak. What you've seen in the press is they've lost order after order. Well, yeah, that's true. They only have 7 years worth of order backlog now, after all the order cancellations. And in my opinion, having heavily examined, studied, and followed the FAA's data and examination of Boeing's operation, I believe that the 737 MAX that got them into this mess because of 2 plane crashes that killed hundreds of people, I believe that problem will be behind them prior to the end of September. I think the 737 MAX is likely to be cleared to fly at that time. And then I'm putting myself in the CEO's shoes, say at American Airlines or an overseas airline or Delta. And I'm going to go, you know what? Maybe I should go ahead and place that order because I got to have new airplanes anyway. Mine are 15, 20 years old, and my engines are 40% less efficient than the ones they have on the 737 MAX. So I need that to reduce my costs long term. And oh, by the way, I'll bet that company is the safest aerospace builder in the world, because after the scrutiny that the FAA has put them under, it would make sense to me that they should be. So Boeing is an extremely strong hold, likely to go above $300 a share prior to the end of the year based on FAA approval and getting the 737 MAX back into circulation. I want to talk about dealing with uncertainty, if I may. What time do we have, Haley?
12:53.
I'm going to wrap this thing up. I was in a bookstore this weekend and I saw this book, Anxious for Nothing, which is a great book by Max Lucado. And I'm sure some of you have read some of his previous writings. Anxiety is one of the biggest health issues we have. Anxiety for Nothing really says that if we understand who's in control of this world and use our faith as a means to not letting anxiety control us, that our lives and our decision making are going to be a lot better. I want to also point out one of the book's main quoted scriptures, Philippians 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present requests to God. I want you all to know that I've never made an investment decision that affected your account, any client account, without praying about it. And I think that's one of the reasons that our firm's long-term numbers are at the envious level they are, because our decisions are guided by our faith, not just by our analysis. Anxiety is a meteor shower of what ifs. That is a quote from the book. The prison of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is also optional. Optional. It's up to us. Anxiety decreases as your understanding of the Father increases. And this I really like. Others see the problems of this world and they wring their hands. We see the problems of the world and we bend our knees. I think that's really important. The problems that are around us right now that seem, I know in many cases, folks, to be insurmountable, honestly, don't seem that way to me. And I think perspective is here is really important. Not getting target fixated, not allowing the worry and the fear to overcome the common sense. This is what our elected leaders and our public health officials and us all need to do. I said until a few days ago, I don't know a single person that's gotten COVID-19. Now, I know my experience is different from many of yours probably, But that now I do know one, and he's 35, 36, and he said, for 12 hours. He tested positive, felt bad for 12 hours, he was back. Of course, he's young. He doesn't have any comorbidities. Healthy individual. The exact type of individual who should have been in a 2-week quarantine and then right back to work. Not the person who finds out I'm positive and then they also find out that, oh, by the way, the company's closing. Then when the governor closes that restaurant down again and the restaurant says we're going bankrupt, now they've lost their job, now they've lost their house. That's not the way it needs to be. COVID-19 is less serious for younger people than ordinary flu. It's less deadly. It's highly deadly for people that are 65, 70 and up. It's highly deadly for people that have comorbidities like heart disease and diabetes. But for the rest of us, we should be working. We should be getting schooled. We should be trying to help those who do have those issues. But we shouldn't be shutting down our economy or acting in illogical ways that we've never employed in any pandemic prior in our country's history. The biggest lesson we've learned from all this is if you want to make money, buy on other people's fear. That's what we've done. That explains the increase in your accounts from the March 23rd low. We're going to continue to apply sound principles to the future movements of your portfolios, which we expect to be highly positive and well above the ordinary 9 to 10% annual long-term rate of return that we've seen for long periods of time. And with that, I'll throw it open to questions if we have any. Haley?
No questions, sir.
All right. I understand there are no questions. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'd like to invite you to please call me or any of our staff or email us if you have any questions that did come up during this presentation. We appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to help you secure your financial future, and we will continue passionately to do that work. God bless all of you.